in many ways, we're getting kind of a bonus act of life. For so long, we've had kind of a 3-act structure in the way that we live as humans. And now there's kind of creeping up on us is this 4th act of extra years. And in many ways, we're very unprepared for that.
Welcome to the Concierge Doc Podcast. David Donnelly.
There's real longevity science that's happening. This thing is real. And it is going to continue to kind of bleed down into mainstream culture and eventually get, I think, to the point to where everyone is kind of aware of these things on a different level. But
I think people should ask themselves why they want to live longer.
Yeah.
Now, that sounds kind of like a dumb question, but it's not really a dumb question.
What's the point of living longer if, you're depressed and miserable and anxious, or streaming, 8 hours of Netflix a day or constantly staring at your phone. And that's a huge takeaway, that there's this 5th vital sign of the status of your relationships that's often being ignored. Dr. Thomas Lewis says in the film, the only way to really find true purpose is to be a part of something that's larger than yourself.
Yeah. Now, why now? Why did this story need to be told now?
The views, opinions, and statements expressed by our guests are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Dr. Jason Littleton or the Concierge Doc Podcast. We do not endorse or take responsibility for any statements, claims, or perspectives shared in this content. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and form their own conclusions.
Access to the information and materials contained in this podcast is at your own risk. The information contained is presented for the purpose of educating the consumer on a variety of wellness and healthcare topics. Nothing contained is intended to be instructional for medical diagnosis or treatment. The information contained is compiled from a variety of sources. The information should not be considered complete and exhaustive and should not be in place of a visit or consultation with your own primary care doctor. Welcome to the Concierge Doc Podcast. I'm your host, CEO, and founder of Littleton Concierge Medicine, Dr. Jason Littleton. Welcome to the podcast. Today's guest, David Donnelly, is a documentary filmmaker whose debut film, Maestro, captured the world of classical music through the eyes of Grammy-winning conductor Pavel Harvey. His films have been screened at esteemed institutions and on networks and streaming services across the globe. His latest film, the award-winning documentary Forever Young, takes viewers inside the scientific revolution that is redefining what it means to age and the deeply human questions that revolution forces us to face. Welcome to the podcast, David Donnelly.
Thank you for having me.
It's awesome to have you on. You have a new films out. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think, like a lot of people, I just started seeing in my feed several years ago all of this stuff about longevity, and I think it gets to the point to where it's overwhelming. You're just constantly getting all of this stuff, the latest drug, or what the billionaires are doing with the new companies, and I really just wanted to figure out, how much of this is BS and how much of this is real. So I spent 3 years finding the answer to that question. And the result is a documentary called Forever Young. We filmed all over the world, and it features some of the top longevity scientists and institutions from around the world. And that's what it is. And so now it's available to share with the world. And it's an exciting time for us to start, getting people's feedback and sharing our baby with the world.
Yeah. Now, why now? Why did this story need to be told now?
I think the main thing is that with this information overload that we have, a lot of the good science that could be really transformational for people if they were to apply it is getting lost from the stuff that gets clicks. And so there's this knowledge gap that is starting to form. The people that can, have concierge doctors or have access to certain levels of information, they're getting a different level of care, but at the same time, there's fundamentals and knowledge that anybody can use and anybody can apply in their day-to-day lives. And this knowledge is just not getting out to the public. And so it's costing lives in some ways. And so what we want to do is bridge that gap. And so for us, the urgency is really to connect people with information that can improve the quality of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. When did longevity science stop feeling speculative to you?
That's a good question. You know, my creative process is exploratory. So I go into it not knowing where we're going to end up. You know, a lot of documentary filmmakers, they kind of they have an idea of where it's going to go. We started, and our producers, who are amazing, Dr. Jim Johnson and Dr. Thomas Lewis, you know, every step of the way, they were there to ensure that the film maintained its scientific integrity. And, you know, as we got questions answered, then there was more questions. And so we kind of just kept pulling that thread and following it around. I think it got real for me. One of the things that I learned is about the aging cliff. You know, there's 2 points that we know of in a person's life where they have a disproportionate period of aging. One of those being in their mid-40s. Me being in my mid-40s, you know, as I learned about that, it kind of hit me. It's like, you know, if I really don't start taking this seriously, then it can have a serious impact for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I'm lucky enough to where I started making that decision throughout this process. And so I got my blood work done. And as I get my blood work done and I start to see the results, I think the longevity science itself became super real when I got my blood work back and I started to evaluate it with longevity doctors, not like a normal GP, and realized that normal is not necessarily good, especially in America. Normal might be sick. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that kind of blew me away because, you know, and doctors are amazing. You know, they go through so much work, but it's just a different paradigm to how to approach, you know, when it comes to longevity, prevention, you know, a preventative approach versus diagnosing something as it you know, arises. And so as I'm looking at this, then I'm looking at it with a different mindset. And I think had I not made this documentary, had I gotten the same blood work, I would have been like, oh man, I'm good. You know, like everything looks good. But once you start to apply it through a different lens, then you can see that, you know, I've really got to start making some big changes in my life.
Yeah, I love what you said. And let's go back to that. When you were talking about, you know, normal could be sick, you know, and first of all, in this worldwide, but also in this country, there's a focus on sick care, not preventive care. And you had some biomarkers that were done, and that changed your perspective. Was there any, and I know you're not a doctor, but was there any biomarker that stuck out to you as really important, or that was a game changer that changed your perspective about your health and longevity?
I think the big one for me was probably thyroid. That was important to me because it's not something I'd given a lot of attention to, and my numbers were considered normal. Mm-hmm. So, you know, nobody had told me maybe this needs some attention. And then when I'm speaking to, you know, doctors who are, you know, specializing in longevity, then it was like, well, you know, sure, it might be normal, but, you know, you're going to the gym, you know what I mean? You're working out. It should be much different from what it is given your lifestyle. And so let's try to find some ways to get that stronger. And so I did start to attend to it, and you can apply things once you can kind of identify these problems and get them under control over, you know, for long-term health. I think another one that I became aware of, but wasn't particularly a problem for me, but something now that I'm very cognizant of, you know, is LDL and cholesterol.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of research on this in our Substack.
Okay.
And that is something now that I keep a much greater eye on than I had previously. But, you know, there's just so much that's connected to inflammation. And once we started learning about how inflammation is impacting longevity and all the different things that can influence it, then you can start to, you know, integrate some of these changes into your life to get it under control. And, you know, over a long term, this could potentially add on years and also quality of life. But I just think in general, getting your blood work done regularly is now, I think, becoming kind of cool. You know, you see a lot of ads for it. But that's only a recent thing, because I do think that there's this idea that it's quite scary. because you might be scared. Oh God, what if it's not great? Or, it kind of forces you to deal with it. And so it's just the process of getting blood work done and understanding how to evaluate, self-educating, and kind of looking beyond just what's considered normal and standard, and then comparing that to what is normal, especially in the United States, and being like, well, do you want to be like that?
Right.
But yeah, I think, and that's just taking the responsibility to self-educate and having the accountability was a big step for me, versus just saying I'm going to go to the gym and and try to watch what I eat and thinking that was enough, because it's not, because there's a lot going on that you can't see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you're exactly right. And what, in your estimation, did longevity science get right?
I think they get right. Well, this is the thing, is that it's just like any revolution, because what's happening right now is a real revolution. So, as a documentary filmmaker, that's one of the reasons that I made the film, because, if you could have captured the Renaissance or some of these amazing periods throughout human history, I do feel like that's what we're living through. It's this whole paradigm that's shifting. But I think in general, what they got right is the fundamentals. There's a lot of hype and a lot of clicks around the latest drug or the latest treatment, what might be, in vogue at the moment. But a lot of this wisdom that we're told as kids, or that gets passed down, the basic fundamentals of sleep, diet, exercise, social connectivity, the science now really shows how that can influence your biological age in a huge way. Before Steve Horvath, came up with the Horvath clock, and we could start to have methylation as a biomarker, it was very hard to quantify how these different things were affecting your health.
Yeah.
But now we can actually measure it. And so I think a lot of people don't realize a lot of longevity science is very pragmatic. They're not all trying to cure death. They're just trying to study how these different things impact your life.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And let's talk about this for a second, because when we hear the word longevity, we think about expanding our life, living longer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people are now living to 110 or 120, 130. What I'm seeing as a physician is that people's quality of life is improving. And if your quality of life is improving, technically you could live longer, because you're feeling better, you're doing better, your outlook's better, and you're catching things sooner, of course. And what's your take on that in terms of length of time getting longer, or people's quality of life getting better when we talk about longevity science?
Well, one of the way that a lot of the way the top scientists, they frame it in health span versus lifespan. And this is all stuff that we talk about in the film. So, health span is the quality of your life, having good years. How many good years do you have left? Lifespan is just the biological reality of how long our species can live. And right now we think it's at 122. They are trying to push that, but I think that's a kind of a different ballgame than what a lot of the main longevity scientists and institutions, which is just to try to increase the health span. Right now, for example, people's biggest fear is no longer cancer like it was many years ago. It's now dementia.
That's true.
And so, if you're alive and you have dementia, which is now impacting millions of people, and it's expected just to keep getting worse,
right?
Then that can't be considered longevity. So we have to differentiate between health span and lifespan.
Great point. That's very true. I'm seeing that as well. What do people get wrong? What does popular culture misinterpret or get wrong about longevity medicine?
Well, I think in general, it's like they're focused on what gets clicks if you're a journalist, right? And I get it. That's the business. You got to have the most. And so they're always interested in, what's the latest thing that the elites are doing, whether it's, plasma blood transfers or, the Brian Johnsons, et cetera. And so the focus is all on kind of the extremes. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think there do needs to be people that push the limits. At least I think so. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think what popular culture gets wrong is that that's all longevity scientists. A lot of the people that we interviewed are very pragmatic, and they're doing science that is not every single day coming up with a new breakthrough. It takes years to come up with a general understanding that just continues to build on this foundation of science. Places like the Buck Institute for Research on Aging, Einstein School of Medicine, they spend years studying stuff that might not always be as sexy as, here's like the latest thing that you can do and here's a magic pill. They're really focused on what can you do to improve the quality of your life. I think that's kind of the big misunderstanding, is that just like, you're watching a play, there's all these different characters. That's exactly what's happening right now. There's lots of different characters in the space.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily all have the same goal. But the actual, a lot of the scientists that I've come to admire, they're not always in the press. They're not household names. They don't have documentaries being made about them all the time, but they're dedicating their lives to stuff that is slowly helping us understand what we can do to spend more time with our loved ones and, not get sick as early on in life. And I think that's really, it's really amazing to me and very inspiring to be around those people. But, as a doctor, science takes time. And so we need constant new stuff to come in the news cycle to say that there's this new breakthrough. But the reality is it does take a long time, for things to happen, especially to get a new drug approved.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, and at the same time, two things can be true at once. There are all kinds of transformational studies that are happening in 2026. There's anti-aging drugs that are going through human trials. There are lots of different things that we're coming to understand about applying drugs that have been around for a long time, but using them towards longevity versus what they were originally used for. And so there is that excitement as well. But I think to really understand it, you got to stick to the fundamentals as a starting point, because otherwise you're just going to keep getting lost on, what's the latest and greatest versus the real foundation of knowledge that these scientists have spent decades building.
Yeah. Right now, peptides are on the stage and they're in the spotlight at this present time. What's your take about that?
Without disclosing too much, I would say that I'm experimenting. So I have kind of a cautious approach. I don't consider myself a biohacker, but I also do have the reality that your body changes over time, and I think the main thing is to have someone that you're consulting with. I'm very fortunate in that I have access to a lot of amazing people that know a lot about this. Not everyone has that.
That's true.
A lot of this stuff that you can get, is if it's not sourced properly, can not have pure ingredients. If it's not measured, it can also have side effects. If you're not getting your blood work done regularly to see how it's impacting you, then it can also have negative things that you didn't think of. There's, polypharmaceutical effect, if you're not clear as to how it's impacting the other stuff that you're taking. So that being said, I think there's a lot of hope for it, but just like I said, right now that's what it is. Next year it's probably going to be something else. So I think, I'm not a doctor, so, I can't give medical advice, but I do think that it's very important to be working with medical professionals who know a lot about this stuff if you're going to be experimenting.
Yeah. Peptides are the rave. They're the craze right now. They're making a difference. I prescribe them. I'm seeing the benefits in people's lives. I think they're going to be here to stay here for a while. Science is always evolving. New technologies are always coming out. we're going to learn something new in the next 2 to 5 years, especially in the age of AI. Things are sped up. So I think it's important to stay flexible, current, knowledgeable, and be able to make adjustments for the benefit of people's health and longevity. I truly love what you've said. I want to move a little bit into talking about control, certainty, and fear. What are people actually afraid of when they say they fear aging?
You watch the film, so you know that it's not just a science documentary. We really get into the existential problems that living longer is starting to cause. And so I think, when you think of aging, you're forced to face your own mortality. I mean, it's as simple as that. But I think it's also about when you're thinking of aging and you've got this fear associated with it, it's a lack of knowledge. It's something that you feel like is out of your control. And of course, there are things that are out of your control, and there's lots of healthy people of which, things happen to them that don't make a lot of sense. And that is part of life. But at the same time, there is a lot that we can control. And I think if people watch the film, they'll be very inspired to know, as Dr. Eric Verdin, CEO of the Buck Institute, says in the film, 93% of your lifespan, your health span, is determined by your lifestyle, not by your genetics. And that's a 180 from what a lot of people thought even a decade ago. And if you are empowered by that knowledge, it kind of makes you realize that you can do a lot in your day-to-day life to, make the odds more in your favor. And I find that very inspiring. And I find that the more you learn about it, the less the fear kind of, takes you over. But I also think there's the fear of the existential, fear of just, makes you rethink your priorities. The moment you start thinking about aging, have I done in my life what I really wanted to accomplish? How are my relationships? Am I going to die alone? Which is something that we learned is really on the top list of people that are older, what they fear the most. And so it just forces you to it's a wake-up call when you have a conversation about aging. And not everyone wants to have that conversation. There's a lot going on in the world. And so, there's a lot of heavy stuff that's going on in the world. But I hope when people watch the film that they'll agree that, our take is very optimistic and hopeful. And ultimately, we wanted to create a tool and a resource that inspires people. Yeah. Not scare them into thinking about this, and also not making promises that, hey, there's going to be a magic pill next year, but instead just saying, this is happening. We are living in the middle of a revolution. Artificial intelligence is expediting that in a whole new way that we never thought possible. And it's an amazing time to be alive, to be able to watch this happening. And, I think if you start to think of it that way, then it's something that's exciting and not something that's terrifying.
Yeah, let's talk about this: purpose versus immortality. What role does mortality play in giving life meaning?
Yeah, just the light questions today, huh? It became much more of an emotional, I think, documentary than I had initially expected as we were going through this. Purpose and meaning is essential to having a healthy life. Mm-hmm. That's just really what it comes down to. And there's different cultures that have, whether you learn about the blue zones and see how people are doing that in their day to day, whether Right. It's your family, your community. In Japan, Ikigai, there's different cultures have their different ways of expressing that. But when you are starting to think about aging, it's hard to imagine a life without having a sense of purpose and meaning. We now know that this system of retirement, for example, can a lot of times be very harmful to people if they are living longer, because our entire system was not created for people to have 4 decades of retirement.
Mm.
It just wasn't. And so you have to find purpose and meaning in your life. And we interviewed a lot of people, especially in Japan. There was this very powerful interview with a woman who was born in Saipan during World War II. And of course, that island had terrible things that happened on it. And she saw, a lot of people jump to their deaths from the cliffs. And she went through a lot. And she's at this nursing home now in Tokyo where, because they don't have a younger labor force to be able to take care of them, they're using robots and technology to come in and interact with these people. And it really felt like I was on a different planet as we were filming that. But it really stuck with me what she said. She just said, all that matters right now is that we are at peace. And someone that's been through that, to her, that's the meaning. It's peace. Somebody else, still dances, even though she's in her 90s. And it was interesting to kind of see what each of them, what their thoughts are, what their regrets are, and what their philosophy is. But the one thing they all had in common of people that are alive, in their 90s that we interviewed, is that they did have a very strong philosophy and some understanding of why they are there and what their purpose is and what their meaning is. And I think that can be very hard to figure out in today's world. Yeah. There's just so much information coming at us 24/7. It doesn't give us a lot of time to reflect.
I want to piggyback on something that you were saying when we were talking about retirement. I think it's how people look at retirement. I think some people look at, well, I'm going to work 40, 50, 60 years, and then I'm going to lay on the beach.
Yeah.
And the retirement now becomes this long gated vacation. Whereas before they had a sense of purpose by their job, perhaps, or what they were doing. And now they're relaxing. And I think the earlier people do that, at some point in that retirement, they almost go through a crisis where they are trying to figure out, why am I here? What am I doing? What is my sense of purpose? And one of the things that I do in my practice, because that's a concern of mine, is that I ask people, give me 5 things that you feel like you must do before you leave Earth. 5 things that get you out of bed. And I wrote this in my book, and I talked about how I gave an example of someone who was so depressed they said they could not get out of bed. And I said, well, let me give you a shocking example. If one of your children fell in the pool, would you get out of bed then? And the person just scoffed at me. He's like, of course I would get out of bed. I'd jump in the pool and try to save them. I said, okay, so there is something you would get out of bed for. Now, you have to have a goal that is so immediate, so purposeful, that you'll get out of bed as if you were saving that child. You also have to have goals like that, but they need to be lifelong goals, because I found in practice that when people don't have these goals, they become demotivated.
Yeah.
And you can even connect it with a feeling of energy. You feel tired more. And I think that all affects your health. You almost have to have something that connects what you're interested in to connect with your health to push the needle. So I just wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, because I loved what you were saying. I think that's so true, what you examined in the documentary. And I just wanted to throw that in there. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying that retirement is a bad thing in itself. It's just that, we have a whole generation of baby boomers that are now, retiring. And as the science is happening and people are able to live longer than we expected, if they're not planning to live longer, there's all of these consequences that we're just starting to understand.
Yeah.
And so, there's got to be a plan that attacks
Right.
that purpose and meaning element.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you said it well. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. From a personal perspective, how did making the film change your thinking about time and purpose for you?
Oh, that's a good question. So there was this in the film we have a death doula actually, which is I think people probably didn't expect when we threw that in there. But there's an exercise that you can do, and it's called a death meditation. And it seems like it can be something that's very not something that the average person would want to do on a regular basis. But the idea is that it's a thought experiment, not unlike what you just said before. If you had your kid in the pool, would you get up and immediately try to save them if they were drowning? You're thinking of these different scenarios, and the process is to really imagine you're at the end of your life and to start thinking about what that's like and what you've accomplished, what you still want to do, and try to really put yourself in that position, and then come back from that and realize that, okay, you do have this time that's available with a new perspective. And as Dr. Thomas Lewis says in the film, the only way to really find true purpose is to be a part of something that's larger than yourself, whatever that is. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges and joys and being a human is the pursuit of that path. And you wouldn't think that that's part of longevity and the science of longevity, but it really is. Because in many ways, we're getting kind of a bonus act of life. For so long, we've had kind of a 3-act structure in the way that we live as humans. And now there's kind of creeping up on us is this 4th act of extra years. And in many ways, we're very unprepared for that. And a lot of that is psychological and in some ways spiritual. And so we have to attend to that just as much as we attend to everything else, because to go back to what we said earlier, what's the point of living longer if you're depressed and miserable and anxious, or streaming 8 hours of Netflix a day, or constantly staring at your phone, and so these are real problems that we have to start dealing with. And to me, they're just as important as everything else, because the science is happening. Whether people want to admit it or not, or whether people are skeptic, there's real longevity science that's happening. This thing is real, and it is going to continue to kind of bleed down into mainstream culture and eventually get, I think, to the point to where everyone is kind of aware of these things on a different level. But we have to be prepared for that, as a society, as an individual, as a species, and we're really not.
I think people should ask themselves why they want to live longer. Now, that sounds kind of like a question, a dumb question, but it's not really a dumb question. You might say, well, of course I want to live longer because I don't want to die. But that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, why do you want to live longer? What? And that's a question of purpose again, because it says, how are you going to feel that time? I'm going to parallel that with a question I hear all the time is, I feel tired. I want more energy. So the question I ask the person is, why do you need more energy? Because is it a charge that you want to feel from like an energy drink? Or do you have something that you're going to do with that energy? And so I challenge, as a physician, I challenge people with that question all the time when they say, hey, I feel tired. I need more energy. I say, okay, what are you trying to do? Because when you know what that is, all of a sudden you're like, okay, I got it. Now I can somewhat quantify the amount of energy I need. I can qualify it, and I can see it taking effect, so to speak. And so anyway, I think I had to go back to your original question sorry, I went on a tangent, but how did it change my idea of time? Yeah.
And mortality. A big part of the film was me spending time with a lot of people who are really living this stuff, not just talking about it. And Dr. Johnson, who's the film's producer and also is a star in the film, he's almost 80, and he's got a gym in his garage and a personal trainer, and when I go and, I go there for business and hang out with him, I mean, this guy, is doing planks and is working out hard and is constantly monitoring, his blood pressure. And to me, it's completely changed my perspective of what can be possible when you're at that age.
Yeah.
That's how it's changed my view of time.
Yeah.
Because I think the big thing was, God, I don't want to be like that old person, you know what I mean, that can barely move. And who does want to be like that, right? I mean, that's just the reality. But once you have a good example of what is possible, then it can completely change the way that you think about things.
Yeah.
And that's definitely what happened to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is crazy. I was like, this is nuts. I mean, it's just, I had never kind of seen that before, right? Or certainly not spent time with somebody and at that age who's in, that, I'm working out with.
Yeah.
Or traveling with,
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I loved what you said there. I mean, look, you make documentaries, and let's just say if you were a patient of mine and I asked you, why do you want to live longer? I wouldn't be surprised if you said, Dr. Jason, I want to live to be 110 because I want to make more documentaries. I want to impact people and affect the way that they look at their world. I'm like, that's interesting. But if you were to say that, okay, you have a sense of purpose in that because you're expanding people's view through what you're putting out there in film. And not that that is your answer. I don't know. I'm just saying it's just a hypothetical. But, right. I perk up when I hear that because now I hear that patient on the other side saying like, hey, you know what? I'm motivated because of this. Now, let's just say you had a day job, but you were doing that. You stopped the day job, you retired, but your purpose in terms of impacting the world through documentaries still continues, and that you have that sense of purpose. And now you're like, look, I need to live longer. I need my health span and lifespan to be the best possible. I need to feel great. Okay, that makes sense. That's interesting. I love hearing things like that, whatever it is.
You see that too with, all these great directors that are doing great work in their 80s. You know what I mean?
Great point.
70s and 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they're doing huge movies that are completely, huge budgets and it's so much stress, but I mean, they love doing it. And I think in many ways, having that sense of purpose or kind of a project that needs to get to completion, it certainly is, keeping a lot of people healthy and having that energy in the morning, like you said earlier, to get up and to do something. It's really important to have the philosophical conversations as much as the scientific ones, in my opinion.
What do you hope people take from the February 25th screening?
Yeah, so we have a screening at Cambridge coming up in the UK. It's featuring Dr. Steve Horvath, who is in the film, who is the creator of the Horvath clock, which really kind of launched the biomarker revolution by being able to quantify biological aging through methylation. And he's a huge name in longevity science. And so I'm interviewing him after the screening. It's sold out in 3 days, which was crazy.
Impressive.
So, and it's all students. It's most of them students. And so what I'm expecting is to get a younger person's perspective, because that is not what comes to mind when you think of a documentary about longevity science. You immediately think that it's going to be an older audience, but I think this is evidence that a lot of younger people really want to live healthier lives.
Right.
And these younger generations, they're taking it seriously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And whether they want to go into it as a biotech field or whether they're just interested in it personally.
Yeah.
I mean, these younger generations there's the backlash from all of the social media and screen time. They're starting to understand how it's impacting their health. What I hope comes from it is a really inspiring conversation with younger people and seeing how this thing is going to continue and grow with them being at the forefront. That's what I hope comes out of it.
Yeah. Wow. I love it. Now, as I told you, off camera, I always ask everyone how they move, eat, drink, sleep. And I want to ask you the same thing. And I'm going to throw a little curveball at you, because as I ask you how you move, eat, drink, sleep, how has your investigation, your documentary might have influenced that? If it, has it changed how you move, eat, drink, sleep?
Oh, yeah.
Please share.
My health has done a 180 in the last year and a half. So 180. So let's start with move. My job is writing and looking at footage most of the time. This is a big part of what I do. And so I'm sitting constantly. And so, it is a challenge to kind of reminding myself to constantly be moving. So going to the gym for me is easy. I get at my aggression. It's kind of in a rhythm that I've been doing it for a long time. I played, sports in college and through high school. So that part for me is easy. But if you're not moving throughout the day, going to the gym once, just isn't enough. So I'm using my Apple Watch quite a bit to remind me to stand up. Mm-hmm. And I constantly now break up my sessions with walking around. I spend a lot of my time in London, being able to walk around the neighborhood, and just going to get a coffee or going for a walk. If the sun happens to pop out, which is not a lot, but making sure that I'm outside, maybe going to the park and during that time, keeping my phone off and disconnecting. But it is a challenge for me. But I will say before making the film, I didn't realize that it was a challenge.
Yeah.
So now I'm aware of how important movement is on a regular basis. Stretch every day. That's really important to me. I notice a huge difference when I stretch and when I don't. When it comes to sleep, that is challenging for me, and that I'm traveling a lot. I've filmed in 40 countries over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm traveling quite a bit, and so jet lag is jet lag. No matter, it is just a reality of what happens when you're flying, really high up in the air and then coming back down and landing.
Right.
And so there are the kind of little hacks that you can do, but I mean, it's really tough on the body. That's just how it is. But I'm an early riser, and I get most of my creative work done before 9 or 10 a.m. I'm usually up between 5 and 5:30, which means I'm going to bed quite early.
Yeah.
I don't monitor my sleep like a lot of people do, but for me, the thing that I've started doing the last year is I'm fortunate enough to where I try not to book anything that's kind of a hard commitment too early in the morning,
right?
So that I can carve out that time, unless it's connected to me as a dad. But if I can not have any big commitments in the morning, as far as calls or meetings or something that's urgent, if I can have that as my creative time and not have to wake up with an alarm,
right?
That to me is the big thing.
That's big. I love
and
that.
That's something I've just started using in the last 6 months to a year. And I noticed a big difference with that.
Yeah.
And that I understand that's a luxury too. Not everyone can do that. You know what I mean? But I do deliberately try to schedule and create my life to where I don't have to wake up to an alarm, so that some nights I might need to sleep a little bit more than other nights. And then I just let my body do the work.
Right.
But sleep, it's just so important. We could do a whole nother documentary just on how important sleep is, but
without question.
Do what?
I said, without question. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to, I'm excited to kind of, listen to your upcoming podcast and learn more about, the sleeping part of it, because I wouldn't say it's when I'm not traveling, I've got a really good rhythm. Yeah. That's for sure. But it's just the travel just really takes its toll.
I want to say, you're exactly right about getting in a plane and the effect that flying has on you, especially when you travel a lot, and how it can impact your health. Sleep's a part of that, especially with time changes, jet lag, things like that. But one of the things when I thought about, and when I designed Move, Eat, Drink, Sleep, one of the things I thought about is that when a person focuses on these basics, it can add, it's like a buffer. And so people who are really taking care of their body, it buffers you in a way, it can buffer you in a way to like some of the jet lag and to, just some of the things that you have to change on the fly, whether it's like waking up early, an unexpected call, these shifts. I think that the healthier a person is, they can make adjustments even when it comes to feeling under the weather a little bit better. I mean, when it came to COVID, people who were younger and healthier to some degree, did a little bit better, right? Versus people who had a lot of, we knew that people who had comorbid illnesses, whether it's COPD, asthma, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, that was a challenge. And the best that you can like optimize your body can make a difference. But likewise, I think when people get back to the basics, no matter what new technology is out there, and I think the new technology is good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's all good.
Yeah.
But when you take care and do self-care, I think it makes a difference.
Oh, huge. And I think anybody that watches the documentary, they'll be very inspired, because I think that's empowering. It's empowering to know that there's things that you can do within your control, that can actually influence this. But, people sleep differently. They have different, their bodies are also different. But for me too, I will say that integrating in peptides has improved the quality of my sleep quite dramatically.
Yep.
And in the last 6 months.
Yep.
I think it changes between people, but for me, that has also really improved the quality of my sleep. I've noticed a lot of big changes from cautiously starting to, integrate some of these different things into my life. But and then we've got drink. Hydration is something that I would say is one of my biggest challenges in my day-to-day life. I understand how important it is, but I'm just not the guy that carries around a giant water bottle and drinks it all day long. I know that's probably what I should do, but I do notice a difference when I'm well hydrated. I do notice a difference that, when I'm in a sunny place and I'm drinking more water, I feel better, not just because of the sun, but also because it's making me drink more water. I do have to force myself, I think, to make sure that I'm drinking enough water on a daily basis. I think that comes back to travel as well too. So I'd love to hear any advice that you have for that, because that is certainly something that I need to get in a better system in place for that.
What I usually tell people on this, when it comes to hydration is, drinking water is paramount. It's basic. We know that. But electrolyte water can make a difference, certainly. Watching out for things that dehydrate people. I always ask people during a physical exam, how much caffeine do you drink? Everyone likes their cup of coffee.
No comment, doctor.
Yeah, right. People don't, and I wrote this in my book, people do not want you touching their coffee. I get that. Yeah. And I'm not saying don't have your coffee. Coffee actually has a lot of benefits as far as antioxidants and things like that. But you can get into a trend of drinking 5 cups of coffee a day, and it can dehydrate you. Alcohol can dehydrate you. So these things pull water out of you, and it can affect how you feel, can affect how energized you feel. You can feel more tired. You can have headaches. And so I try to tell people, make sure that you're drinking enough fluid based on your health status. Some people have to drink a different amount. If you have congestive heart failure or renal failure, you're going to have to drink less. But staying hydrated and not taking things to an excess where they're dehydrating you, like caffeine, is important. So that's what I like to tell people. When you're flying, you are in an environment where the humidity is 1% to 2%.
Yeah.
And you're in a pressurized environment and water is just coming out of you. So that's why when you're in an airport, you'll see a lot of water, electrolyte drinks, niche type of electrolyte drinks, or powders because they know that people are starting to figure out that when you fly, you get dehydrated, you feel tired, you feel more jet lag. So you got to stay hydrated. So things like that, I like to tell people. But listen, I think that I'm excited about your documentary.
Thank you for watching. I appreciate it.
Before we end here, people need to see this. I want to give you a final word on, to just kind of tell people why they need to come see your documentary.
Sure. So we're in the midst of a revolution that's happening. And the only question is, are you going to be a part of it or not? And the film is a great point of entry for wherever you are in your longevity journey. Whether you're just curious about making life changes, whether you are really into it and want to see some familiar faces in that space. But there is something for everybody. It's not just a science documentary. It's really a documentary about what it means to be human, our greatest hopes, dreams, wildest dreams, and also our deepest fears. And I think above all, it's really a love story, which surprises a lot of people. I mean, there's a science fiction storyline that is integrated throughout, and that's just part of what it means to be human. That it's really hard to have the conversation about longevity if we're not putting that in context with other people. What's the point of living 100 years if you're on Mars by yourself? It's got to be about your relationships with other people. And that's a huge takeaway, that there's this fifth vital sign of the status of your relationships that's often being ignored. And overall, I think it's inspiring. And we've had a lot of people tell us that it's inspired them to change their lives and make big changes in their lives and to rethink what it means to age in general. And we just want to continue sharing, this message, because it's just not getting out there enough. These scientists are great at science. What they're not so great at is getting the word out to people, because they're just really good at doing science. So, we're the cavalry out there trying to get this stuff out, that if you really start to self-educate, it's so surprising what can happen when you just do a little bit of due diligence. It can go a long way.
Love it. Where can listeners learn more about you and the film?
Foreveryoung.film is the film's website. Right now, you can go directly on the film's website to watch it before it hits streamers. So don't wait for it to go on streamers. You can actually watch it right now with a 3-day rental. We also have a Substack, a Forever Young Substack, which is also linked up to our site. And we are having, content drops probably 2 or 3 times a week. And that is just a continuing journey of really digging into this stuff. And that's also something that I think is a great way to really dig in deep and get your questions answered from the top people in the fields, because we're constantly bringing people in and asking them the questions that people want to have answers to.
Love it. Love it. Well, I want to just thank you for coming on the Concierge Doc Podcast. And I want to make sure you listeners out there to check out his film. Make sure you download this podcast and share it. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. And I'm looking forward to the next time we get a chance to sound and talk with you, David. And thank you. I wish you the best.
Yeah, ditto. And when I come back to Florida, I want to. I think I'm going to have to fill out a new patient form there. So I need to
come on through. We'd love to have you.
I need a longevity doctor in Florida. So let's have that separate conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, audience, thank you for watching this podcast. I can't wait to talk to you next time. Talk to you later.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.